Charles Whitman was an American mass murderer responsible for the University of Texas tower shooting on August 1st, 1966. Charles Whitman was the eldest of three sons. He was born on June 24th, 1941 in Lake Worth, Florida. He was the oldest of three sons born to Margaret and Charles Whitman Jr. His parents' marriage was broken due to domestic violence. Whitman's father was an authoritarian. He provided for his family, but he also expected near perfection from them. He would physically and emotionally abuse his wife and his three kids. Growing up, Whitman was described as a polite child. He was slow to anger, and he was also very intelligent. When he was just 6 years old, an examination determined that his IQ was 139. Obviously, academic achievements were encouraged by his parents, and any indication of failure or a lazy attitude was met with discipline. Most of the time, it was physical discipline, compliments of his father. Margaret was a devout Roman Catholic who raised her sons to be as well. The Whitman brothers regularly attended Mass with their mother, and all three brothers actually served as altar boys at the Sacred Heart Roman Catholic Church in Lake Worth. Whitman's father collected firearms, and he taught his sons how to shoot, clean, and maintain their weapons. He regularly took them on hunting trips, and Charles became a talented hunter and an accomplished marksman. His father even said Charlie can plug out the eye of a squirrel by the time he was 16. Whitman joined the Boy Scouts of America when he was 11 years old, and he became an Eagle Scout at 12 years and 3 months. Apparently, he was the youngest Eagle Scout up to that time. And Whitman was also a talented pianist at the age of 12. Around that same time, he began a long newspaper route. On September 1st, 1955, Whitman began high school. He attended St. Anne's High School in West Palm Beach, and it was reported that he was moderately popular. Only a month into high school, he had saved enough money from his newspaper route to buy a Harley Davidson. Whitman graduated high school in June of 1959. He graduated 7th in a class of 72 students. A month after graduating high school, Whitman enlisted in the United States Marines without his father's knowledge. Whitman told a family friend that the catalyst for his enlistment was an incident a month earlier. He had come home drunk and his father beat him and threw him into the family swimming pool. On July 6th, Whitman left home after being assigned an 18-month tour at Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. When his father learned of his enlistment, he called a branch of the federal government to attempt to cancel his son's enlistment. And during Whitman's initial 18-month service between 1959 and 1960, he earned a sharpshooter's badge and the Marine Corps Expeditionary Medal. He earned 215 out of 250 possible points on marksmanship tests. After completing his assignment, Whitman applied to the United States Navy and Marine Corps Scholarship Program because he wanted to complete college and become a commissioned officer. He completed courses in mathematics and physics at a preparatory school in Maryland. He then transferred to the University of Texas at Austin to study mechanical engineering. On September 15, 1961, Whitman entered the mechanical engineering program at UT Austin. Despite his intelligence, he started off college pretty poorly. Whitman earned a reputation as a practical joker, and his friends reported that they noticed he made morbid and unsettling statements. In 1962, it was reported that he said a person could stand off an army from atop the main building's clock tower before they got him. When Charles was 20 years old, in February of 1962, he met a woman named Kathleen Frances Leisner. She was an education major, 2 years his junior. They began dating, and she was actually his first serious girlfriend. They dated for just 5 months before announcing their engagement on July 19, 1962. Less than 2 months later, on August 17, 1962, they were married in Needville, Texas. After their marriage, his grades improved. However, the Marines considered them insufficient for the continuation of his scholarship. He was ordered to active duty in February of 1963. He went to Camp Lejeune in North Carolina for the remainder of his 5-year enlistment. There, he was automatically promoted to the rank of Lance Corporal. During that time, he was hospitalized for 4 days after saving another Marine by actually lifting a Jeep which had rolled over an embankment. Whitman continued to gamble, and in November of 1963, he was court-martialed for gambling, extortion, possession of a personal firearm on base, and threatening another Marine over a loan for which he had demanded interest. While awaiting his court-martial in 1963, Whitman began to write a diary titled Daily Record of C.J. Whitman. He would write about his daily life in the Marine Corps, his interactions with his wife, and other family members. He would also write about his upcoming court-martial and contempt for the Marine Corps, criticizing them for inefficiencies. He would often write about his wife and how bad he wanted to be with her. And he also wrote about plans to free himself from financial dependence of his father. He was sentenced to 30 days confinement and 90 days of hard labor. And after this incident, he was demoted from lance corporal to private. A year later, in December 1964, he was honorably discharged from the Marines, and he decided to return to the University of Texas and enrolled in the architectural engineering program. He worked as a bill collector for the Standard Finance Company. Eventually, he would work as a bank teller at the Austin National Bank. In January 1965, he worked a temp job with Central Freight Lines. He was a traffic surveyor for the Texas Highway Department. He was also a volunteer scout leader with Austin Scout Troop 5. During this time, his wife worked as a biology teacher. In May 1966, Whitman's mother announced her decision to divorce Charles' father because of physical abuse. And during this stressful time, Whitman was abusing amphetamines. He began experiencing severe headaches, and he described them as being tremendous. In the months prior to the attack, Whitman sought professional help for overwhelming and violent impulses, including fantasies about shooting people from the tower at the college. And the day before the shootings, he bought a pair of binoculars and a knife from a hardware store and some Spam from a 7-Eleven convenience store. He picked up his wife from her summer job as a telephone operator, and then he met his mother for lunch at the Wyatt cafeteria. And then later, he and his wife hung out with a couple friends. And then his wife went back to work at 6 o'clock at night to 10 o'clock at night to work her shift. And at 6:45 that night, Whitman began typing his suicide note. He wrote, "I do not quite understand what it is that compels me to type this letter. Perhaps it is to leave some vague reason for the actions I've recently performed. I don't really understand myself these days. I'm supposed to be an average, reasonable, and intelligent young man. However, lately, I can't recall when it started, I've been a victim of many unusual and irrational thoughts. These thoughts constantly recur, and it requires a tremendous mental effort not to concentrate on useful and progressive tasks." Interestingly, he added a request to have an autopsy performed on him to determine if there had been a discernible biological cause for his actions, and something that contributed to his continuing and increasingly severe headaches. He wrote that he decided to kill his mother and wife. He wrote that he didn't think that his mother, quote, ever enjoyed life as she is entitled to, end quote. He wrote that his wife had, quote, been a fine wife to me as any man could ever hope to have, end quote. He wrote that he wanted to relieve his wife and mother of the suffering of this world, and that he wanted to save them the embarrassment of his actions. Just after midnight on August 1st, 1966, he drove to his mother's apartment, and Whitman stabbed his mother, Margaret Elizabeth Whitman, to death at 12:30 a.m. Officials believed that he rendered his mother unconscious before stabbing her in the heart. And after killing his mother, he placed her body on her bed, covered it with sheets, and then left a handwritten note beside her body. He wrote, "To whom it may concern, I have just taken my mother's life. I am very upset over having done it. However, I feel that if there is a heaven, she is definitely there now. I am truly sorry. Let there be no doubt in your mind that I loved this woman with all my heart." Then he left his mother's house and he returned home. At 3 a.m., he stabbed his wife Kathleen to death. He stabbed her 3 times in the heart as she was sleeping. Then he covered her body with sheets, then resumed typing the note that he started the night before. He wrote on the side of the page, "Friends interrupted, 8/1/66, Monday, 3 o'clock a.m., both dead." Then he continued the rest of the note by pen. "I imagine it appears that I brutally killed both of my loved ones. I was only trying to do a quick, thorough job. If my life insurance policy is valid, please pay off my debts. Donate the rest anonymously to a mental health foundation. Maybe research can prevent further tragedies of this type. Give our dog to my in-laws. Tell them Kathy loves Scoochie very much. And if you can find in yourselves to grant my last wish, cremate me after the autopsy." He left instructions requesting that 2 rolls of camera film be developed and wrote notes to each of his brothers. He wrote a note on an envelope labeled "Thoughts for the Day," and he added on the outside of that envelope 8/1/66, "I could never quite make it. These thoughts are too much for me." Later that morning, he rented a hand truck and cashed about $250 worth of bad checks at a bank, and then he drove to a hardware store and purchased a .30 caliber Universal M1 carbine, 2 magazines, and 8 boxes of ammunition. He told the cashier that he planned to go hunt wild hogs. And then he went to a gun shop and he purchased 4 more carbine magazines, 6 additional boxes of ammunition, and a can of gun cleaning solvent. Then, at a Sears, he purchased a Sears Model 60 12-gauge semi-automatic shotgun before returning home. At home, he packed a trunk with an arsenal. He packed a Remington 700 6mm bolt-action hunting rifle, a .35 caliber pump rifle, the M1 carbine, a 9mm Luger pistol, a Gillespie Brescia 25 caliber pistol, a Smith & Wesson M19 357 Magnum revolver, the shotgun that he got from Sears, which he had sawn off the barrel and the buttstock, and more than 700 rounds of ammunition. He also packed food, coffee, vitamins, Dexedrine, Excedrin, earplugs, jugs of water, matches, lighter fluid, rope, binoculars, a machete, 3 knives, a transistor radio, toilet paper, a razor, and a bottle of deodorant. He made his way to the University of Texas at Austin, and at about 11:25 a.m. he reached the university. He showed false research assistant identification to obtain a parking permit. He wheeled his armory on the rented hand truck toward the main building of the university. Upon entering the main building, the elevator didn't work, but an employee named Vera Palmer activated it for him. And he said, "Thank you, ma'am. You don't know how happy this makes me." He exited the elevator on the 27th floor, and he lifted his equipment up another flight of stairs and made his way to the observation deck. There, he met the observation deck receptionist named Edna Townsley. Charles knocked Townsley to the floor, struck her in the back of the head with his rifle butt, and split the back of her skull. And then he struck her above the left eye before dragging her behind a couch. Seconds later, a woman named Cheryl Botts and a man named Don Walden entered from the observation deck. Don noticed the guns, but he assumed that Charles was just going to the observation deck to shoot pigeons. And Charles smiled at the couple and he said, "Hi, how are you?" Then they went down to the elevator. Charles then moved a desk across the entrance from the stairway. At about 11:45 a.m., Mike and Mark Gabber came across the desk that Charles had placed to block the entrance. As they attempted to squeeze past, Charles fired his shotgun, hitting Mike in the shoulder, and he shot Mark in the head, killing him. He fired down the stairs, striking 2 women named Marguerite and Mary. Mary was left paralyzed from the neck down and legally blind. Charles then shot receptionist Townsley in the head, and then he made his way to the observation deck. From over 230 feet above the campus, Charles began his massacre. An 18-year-old girl named Claire Wilson was walking with 18-year-old Thomas Ekman. Claire was 8 months pregnant. At 11:47 a.m., as they walked out of the student union, Claire was shot in her abdomen, killing her unborn baby boy. Thomas Ekman attempted to give her aid, and he was shot in the chest and died instantly. And Claire was hospitalized for 3 months, but eventually recovered. Robert Boyer, a mathematician, was struck in the lower back and died. Devereaux Huffman, a PhD student, was shot in the arm and fell to the ground. David Mattson had part of his wrist blown off. Roland Elk was struck in the arm by shrapnel, and then he was hit in the leg while pulling David Mattson to safety. Their friend Thomas Ashton, on his way to meet David and Roland for lunch, was shot in the chest and died. Tom Herman and Adrian Littlefield were injured. Homer Kelly was shot in the leg while helping them into his store. A girl named Nancy, who was a student, and Ellen, who was a university employee, were injured. Nancy was shot in the hip, and Ellen was struck in the left leg by a ricochet. Alec Hernandez, a high school student, was shot in the leg. Karen Griffith was shot in the shoulder and chest, and her right lung was pierced. She died 7 days later. Thomas Carr, a student, was hit in the spine while coming to Griffith's aid. He died about an hour later. David Gunby, a student, was shot through his upper left arm, and the bullet entered his abdomen, severing his small intestine. During surgery, it was discovered that Gunby had only one functioning kidney to begin with, which had now been severely damaged, and he was in great pain for the rest of his life. In 2001, he died 1 week after discontinuing dialysis, and his death was officially ruled a homicide. Two newlyweds, Brenda and Adrian Littlefield, were leaving the tower when Brenda was shot in the hip. Adrian was struck in the back as he bent over her. Claudia Rutt and her boyfriend Paul Sontag and their friend Clara Wheeler hid behind a construction barricade. Paul stood up and he was shot in the mouth, killing him instantly. Claudia attempted to go to Paul, and Carla was shot through her hand. The bullet went through her hand and struck Claudia in the chest, killing her. Roy Schmidt, an electrician, was hiding behind his car, and he was about 500 yards away from the tower. He thought he was out of range, so he stood up and he was shot in the abdomen. And at 12:08 p.m., a police officer named Bill Speed arrived on scene. He hid behind a stone column. A bullet shot through the 6-inch space between the columns, and it hit Bill. He later died in the hospital. Harry Walchuk, a PhD student, was leaving a magazine store when he was shot in the chest, killing him. Billy Snowden, a basketball coach, was struck in the shoulder from over 500 yards away. Sandra Wilson was shot in the chest. Students Abdul Kashab, an exchange student from Iraq, and Jeanette Paulos, his fiancée, were both shot. Lena Phillips, another student, was shot in the shoulder. Students Oscar Roy Vela and his girlfriend Irma Garcia were both shot and dragged to safety. Evelino Esparza, a carpenter, was shot in his left arm, and his brother and uncle dragged him to safety. A reporter named Robert Hurd was shot in the arm. Student John Scott Allen, looking at the tower through a window of the student union, was shot in his right forearm. Morris Homan, a funeral director, was using his business's ambulance to take victims to the hospital. He was shot in his right leg. F.L. Foster and Robert Freed were wounded in the crossfire between Whitman and people returning fire from the ground. Della and Marina Martinez, visiting from Mexico, were both wounded by bullet fragments. A student named Dolores Ortega was cut on the back of her head either from glass or from a bullet, and C.A. Stewart was not shot, but he was still injured in the commotion. Throughout the entire ordeal, there was a lot happening on the ground. While all of this was going on, some people mistook the sounds of shots for construction noise. Others thought people falling to the ground were performing some sort of theater. Some thought it was an anti-war protest, and one of the injured reported lying on the ground bleeding and being told by a passerby to get up. An officer named Houston McCoy looked for a way into the tower when a student offered to help. The student said that he had a rifle at home, so Officer McCoy drove the student to his home to retrieve the rifle. Alan Crum, a retired Air Force tail gunner, offered to help the police too. Inside the tower, he accompanied Department of Public Safety agent Dub Cowan and police officer Jerry Day up the elevator. Safety agent Cowan provided Crum with a rifle. Officers began making their way to the tower via underground maintenance tunnels. Police officers and several civilians fired back at Whitman from the ground. A police sharpshooter in a small plane was circling at a distance to try to distract Whitman. Officers Ramiro Martinez and Jerry Day made it to the 27th floor with retired Air Force tail gunner Alan Crum. Officer Jerry Day helped escort M.J. Gabor away. Before moving to the observation deck, Alan Crum asked Officer Martinez to deputize him. Officer Martinez found Marguerite Lamport, Mark Gabor, and Mary Gabor, and Mike Gabor hiding beneath a stairwell leading to the reception area. They gestured and pointed in the direction of Whitman. Martinez made his way into the observation deck, telling Crum to stay back by the door. Officers McCoy and Day reached the observation deck a few minutes later. At some point around 1:24 p.m., Alan Crum accidentally fired his rifle. Whitman moved south, searching for the sound of the rifle shot, while Officers Martinez and McCoy rounded the northeast corner. Officer Martinez leapt out and fired at Whitman, but missed all of his shots. While Martinez was firing, Officer McCoy saw Whitman's head looking over a light ballast. Officer McCoy fired, hitting Whitman between the eyes, killing him instantly. Officer Martinez fired again, hitting Whitman on his left side. Officer Martinez grabbed McCoy's shotgun and fired a direct shotgun blast into the deceased Whitman's left arm. In the immediate aftermath, Officer Martinez was almost accidentally shot by those still firing from the ground, not realizing that Whitman was already dead. 1 month later, on August 2nd, an autopsy was performed. During the autopsy, a pecan-sized brain tumor was discovered. Forensic investigators theorized that the tumor pressed against his amygdala. This is the part of the brain related to anxiety and fight or flight responses. Following the shootings, the tower observation deck was closed. Bullet holes were repaired, and the tower was reopened in 1968. But then it closed again 7 years later in 1975 after 4 suicides. Security features were installed, and it was reopened in 1999 with metal detectors and appointment-guided tours. After the shooting, Officers Martinez and McCoy were awarded Medals of Valor. In 2006, a memorial garden was dedicated to those who died or were affected. In 2008, the names of those that helped stop Charles Whitman were added to a plaque mounted on an Austin Police Precinct building. In 2014, Claire Wilson's stillborn son received a tombstone in Austin Memorial Park Cemetery after his grave was rediscovered. The tombstone was adorned with a crucifix that reads Baby Boy Wilson, August 1st, 1966. In 2016, in the Memorial Garden, a monument listing the names of the victims was added on the shooting's 50th anniversary. The tower's clock was stopped at 11:48 a.m. for 24 hours, and the day was declared Ramiro Martinez Day by the city of Austin. At the time, the attack was the deadliest mass shooting by a lone gunman in United States history, only being surpassed 18 years later by the San Isidro McDonald's massacre. This is for informational purposes only. The people responsible and their actions should in no way be glorified. There are monsters among us. We must learn from our past and be preemptive. Regardless of motive, violence should always be a last resort as a method for inducing or provoking social change. Actions that lead to the taking of lives of innocent people are simply not justified.